Welcome to where time falls quiet.
Ten ancient tablets that rewrite human history. Take a moment to subscribe, so this place of calm is always here for you. What if everything we believed about the origins of civilization was merely a prologue written over erased lines? Picture it, the dust of the ancient world, the trembling silence of an excavation trench, and the first glimmer of an inscription emerging from clay, hardened by 4,000 years of waiting. The air feels thick there, heavier than it should be, as if sound itself recoils from disturbing what rests beneath. Every archaeologist knows the sensation, that quiet moment when the past breathes back at you. Imagine holding a tablet of clay in your hands. It fits awkwardly, solid yet fragile, still bearing the impressions of a scribe's fingerprints pressed into it before the clay was fired. The markings resemble tiny wedges, mere geometry to the untrained eye, but arranged with terrifying precision. Each angle, each indentation, holds a unit of meaning in the oldest written system known, cuneiform. Yet beneath that bureaucracy of signs lies something more. The haunting sense that these people were not beginning something. They were continuing it. Archaeologists once described early Sumerian texts as primitive attempts at record-keeping, lists of grain, herds, and debts. But when the lists began to form genealogies and the genealogies turned into cosmic histories, the pattern changed. What emerged from those tablets was not invention, but remembrance. Civilizations do not spontaneously create language, mathematics, and agriculture simultaneously. They inherit them, piecing back fragments of knowledge from something older. And here, in the slow-baked tablets of Mesopotamia, the clay itself becomes an archive of continuity. There's a strange intimacy about clay. Unlike stone or metal, it begins soft, responsive, alive almost, and only becomes immortal once touched by fire. To write on clay was to freeze a thought in its moment of birth. Each symbol carries the warmth of a living hand, a moment of intention that refuses to die. When those shards are unearthed, the message outlasts nations, dynasties, even empires. The clay remembers what minds forget, and it remembers everything. Deep within the vaults of museums, thousands of such tablets remain unread, catalogued, numbered, archived in climate-controlled silence. They form strata of language, commerce, law, astronomy, and myth, each one a pulse in the archaeological heart of time. Scholars have deciphered only a fraction, often dismissing the rest as redundant or fragmentary. But among the mundane entries, wages, taxes, daily rations, there appear anomalies, lists that span epochs no civilization should recall, star charts predicting precessional movements invisible to the naked eye, equations that seem to describe trigonometric relationships millennia before Greek geometry. When first encountered, these discrepancies were called coincidences, accidental alignments of numbers and stars. Yet coincidence accumulates like sediment. Eventually, it becomes a layer. And a layer, in archaeological terms, means history. Or more precisely, a history overwritten by time, yet unwilling to disappear. The tablets describe dynasties before the flood, measurements of celestial bodies that match data. Modern instruments have only recently confirmed. Each anomaly shatters the narrative of a linear progression from ignorance to intelligence. Instead, it evokes something more circular, a repeated awakening. Consider the Sumerian lists. Their kings ruled not for decades but for tens of millennia, and their reigns ended abruptly with cataclysmic floods. For generations, this was pure myth, a poetic exaggeration. But when geology uncovered traces of widespread sedimentation along the Tigris and Euphrates, dated to roughly the same epoch, the myth transformed. The flood was no allegory, it was stratigraphy. And those kings, whatever their real lifespans, marked a civilization trying to archive memory through narrative, preserving the echo of a world lost. If it begins to feel unsettling, it should. Because beneath every cuneiform wedge lies an assumption that writing itself was not humanity's first attempt to communicate with permanence, merely its first survival. Those who invented it wrote already with the urgency of remembering, as if something before them had vanished, as if they feared it could vanish again. Imagine you are that scribe, the reed stylus pressed against the moist clay, your hand trembling slightly as heat and dust settle on your skin. You do not write poetry or prayers, but quantities, names, the architecture of language itself. You are recording not inspiration, but continuity. The temple around you hums with the sound of calculation, scribes chanting numbers, priests invoking measures, officials weighing rations. It is a world rebuilt under the assumption that the last one fell because it forgot how to measure. In your mind there is an older rhythm, a memory of a city swallowed by water or time. You write faster, carving the code before the clay hardens. You do not ask who will read it. You only trust that someone will. And in that trust lies the luxury of civilization, a belief that memory can resist oblivion. Modern scholarship calls this bureaucracy. But bureaucracy at its origin was devotion to the act of storing meaning beyond the limit of breath. The ledgers of Uruk were not neutral, they were votive offerings to time. Each tablet was a small promise that knowledge, once immortalized in clay, would never die again. Yet history proves otherwise. Knowledge suffers erosion, it fades, then returns, wearing new symbols and new languages. Restoration, not invention. This is the rhythm the tablets whisper beneath their dust. Hold that thought for a moment. The possibility that our own discoveries are not discoveries at all, but recoveries. The wheel, mathematics, astronomy, all emerging suddenly, fully formed, as if reactivated rather than created. The suddenness of civilization has always puzzled historians. There is no learning curve. No signs of gradual experimentation. Just emergence. 1 century they were counting livestock. The next, they were mapping the heavens. The transition is too abrupt, too fluent, to be explained by evolution alone. Some scholars propose cultural diffusion from lost centers of early knowledge, an Ice Age civilization erased by rising seas yet surviving in fragments across continents. Others dismiss this idea as pseudoscience, but even rejection cannot erase the unease that lingers around the artifacts. A tablet catalogued as CBS 10,673 encodes a mathematical ratio, later known as the Pythagorean triple. Another, assigned as BM 8558, contains astronomical terms associated with orbital resonance. These are not isolated curiosities. They are the residue of understanding. When the British archaeologist Leonard Woolley excavated Ur in the early 20th century, he described the moment of unearthing a city beneath another city, a metropolis buried under meters of flood sediment. He noted that the older layer showed advanced architecture and organization, not primitive settlement. This inversion of expectations still ripples through archaeology today. The deeper one digs, the more sophisticated the remains appear. Civilization, it seems, declines backward. This pattern challenges our deepest assumptions of progress. It implies that time does not build steadily upward, but moves like a tide, erasing and restoring. Each era believes itself the beginning. Each is in truth a restoration project of something older. The clay tablets are not primitive documents. They are emergency records, recovery manuals, reconstructed blueprints of inherited systems. They encode not only mathematics and trade, but the memory of why civilization must be maintained to prevent forgetting. If the idea feels uncomfortably relevant, it should. We too live in a cycle of information so vast that meaning risks dissolution. Our own data, written in silicon rather than clay, claims immortality, yet depends on fragile electricity. When the tablets are compared to our archives, the resemblance is eerie. Both civilizations, ancient Sumer and modern mankind, share the same belief: that memory can outlast the collapse that awaits. There is a term in archaeology, the palimpsest. It refers to a surface reused for new writing after the original was scraped off. Civilization itself, when examined closely, is a palimpsest. Beneath each technological dawn lies the ghost of an earlier light. Every innovation overlays something already known, something nearly remembered. The clay speaks even when silent, telling us that knowledge never truly disappears. It hides in material, awaiting the next reader brave enough to listen. And so, the story of the tablets is not the story of invention, but of restoration. Their silence across millennia holds audible warning that memory, if unguarded, dissolves into myth, and myth soon erodes into dust. Those who first pressed symbols into clay were not beginning history. They were salvaging it. They understood that without written continuity, time would devour itself. When you think of them now, the scribes, the priests, the nameless artisans who molded clay into permanence, imagine the weight of their fear as much as their faith. To burn the tablets was to erase eternity. To bury them was to trust the earth as witness. And in that trust, the clay became more than medium. It became covenant. The tablets lie today under glass, fragmentary, some still encrusted with the soil of their graves. Scholars read them clinically, translating inventories and decrees. Yet behind those sterile transcriptions lingers an ancient anxiety, the awareness of repetition. We rediscover their knowledge only to forget our own. The tablet's story is a mirror. What they wrote about us, we are now writing about them. So this is where our journey begins, not among myths, but among memories pretending to be myths. The first secret is simple yet devastating. Civilization does not remember its origins because those origins are circular. The clay remembers everything, even when we do not. Behind each wedge-shaped mark lies the hum of something unfathomably old, the echo of a world before history began, whispering through fire-hardened dust, waiting to be read again. Buried in the archives of Mesopotamia lies a single tablet that disobeys time itself. It is brittle, faintly ridged, and marked with rows of names followed by numbers so vast they defy comprehension. Each line is a declaration of rule, king after king, city after city. And yet something is wrong. The durations carved into this clay stretch into tens of thousands of years, outliving not only the cities, but the rivers and the very landscapes that framed them. This document is known as the Sumerian King List. It reads more like a chronicle of gods than of men, but it was written with bureaucratic precision, as if recording shipments of livestock. The kings of Eridu, Bad Tibera, Larak, Sippar, and Shurupak are named as if they were historical administrators, yet their reigns last for epochs. Alulim of Eridu is said to have ruled for 28,800 years. Alalgar, his successor, for 36,000 years. And then, with stark finality, the text breaks the pattern. The flood swept over. When it was first translated, scholars viewed it as mythological theatre, a genealogy of gods blurred with human memory. But the phrasing of the document is curiously clinical. It presents itself as an official record, not as a hymn. The numbers are exact, not rounded. The city sequence is consistent with later layers of archaeology. It was as though a scribe had been told to preserve data that contradicted reason, compelled by duty to record truth exactly as received, whether or not it made sense. Imagine holding that tablet in your hands and reading those spans of kingship. You would ask the question every modern mind must. How could anyone rule for so long? Yet the ancients seem not to see absurdity there. Longevity, for them, was not biology, it was cosmic calibration. The flood was not punishment, but reset. Civilization, in this logic, did not evolve. It rebooted. The King List marks those who ruled before the memory of humanity was wiped clean. Modern geology began to whisper agreement, though reluctantly. In the 1920s, deep excavations beneath the ruins of Ur and Shurupak revealed a thick stratum of flood-deposited silt sandwiched between layers of human settlement. It was not a minor event, a local inundation, but a cataclysmic disruption dated around 5,000 years before our era. Above the silt, culture resumed, different yet strangely familiar. Below it, a vanished people whose techniques seemed too advanced for their supposed time. The flood, therefore, was not invention. It was stratigraphic fact. This realization changes the of the King List entirely. Its dividing line, before the flood and after the flood, is not metaphor. It is stratigraphic reporting. Each city-state that rose afterward appears to rebuild the pattern of the world that preceded. Governance, language, even the very layout of temples followed templates as if inherited. The Sumerians themselves wrote that kingship descended from heaven twice, once before the flood and once after. Their role was not to create, but to restore divine order to a fractured earth. History typically moves forward, but in these tablets, it loops. The flood is not an ending, it's punctuation. Recurrent, resetting. The deeper implication suggests that humanity lived through cycles of civilization and oblivion, perhaps more than once. The kings before the deluge may symbolize an age of near-divine knowledge, a heritage of astronomical, hydraulic, and architectural expertise erased by the collapse of climate and the rise of water. When the survivors rebuilt, they remembered fragments, measures, proportions, myths, and wrote them anew. Hold the timeline in your mind, tens of thousands of years compressed into a few inches of clay. Could these implausible reigns represent not individuals, but dynastic eras or astronomical cycles? Some researchers have noticed that the numbers correspond to multiples of 3,600, the so-called Sar, the great unit in the Sumerian sexagesimal system. If interpreted mathematically rather than biologically, the reigns describe celestial periods, orbital harmonics hidden in royal language. The kings, then, become timekeepers. The King List transforms into a cosmological ledger. The flood's arrival terminates this cosmic arithmetic. The document simply announces, the waters came, the rule was taken to the heavens. Afterward, rulership descends again, but the numbers shrink dramatically, from tens of millennia to decades. The contrast is devastating. It reads like a world rebooting on lower voltage, as if intelligence itself had been reduced. This abrupt contraction of lifespan may encode more than myth. It could describe environmental, genetic, or atmospheric change. Something altered the human condition irreversibly. In later myths rewritten on Babylonian tablets, this rupture reappears as the story of Atrahasis, the wise man warned of divine wrath, builder of a vessel, preserver of life. Yet beneath the moral narrative hides an engineering manual. Measurements, construction material, and ratios specified to remarkable consistency. Atrahasis is not poetry, he is procedure. The flood tradition in every language is both trauma and archive, a technical report disguised as parable. To walk among the ruins of these flood cities is to sense this double meaning. The silt layer at Shurupak forms a boundary between darkness and resurrection. Above it, the re-emergence of urban grids, administrative tablets, and standardized measurement again. The human story restarts as if guided by instruction. The King List sequence becomes more than a roll of rulers. It is a resurrection schedule for civilization itself. When the document was first reconstructed from fragments, its opening line startled translators. After kingship descended from heaven. That phrase, routinely dismissed as religious decoration, may express literal memory, the concept that kingship once represented the return of a structured order descending upon chaos. In the aftermath of a planetary reset, knowledge reappeared as authority. Power was inseparable from the capacity to remember. Imagine the perspective of a survivor emerging from waters, receding across the plains. The landmarks have vanished. Every familiar sound replaced by silence and carrion wind. To restore the world would require memory, not of emotion, but of instruction, measurements, calendars, laws. The King List reads like a survival scripture, one that defines civilization as remembrance in written form. Each name represents a link in continuity between epochs before and after destruction. The kings are less rulers than archivists of existence. Hold that silence for a moment. Picture the rivers glimmering in the first returning sun, sediment shining like ground glass. Somewhere, a scribe kneels and writes the first line of restoration. When we read the King List today, we are eavesdropping on that act of renewal. It is a voice trying to remember the shape of time after time itself collapsed. The list also contains a hidden geometry of placement. Each city associated with antediluvian kingship lies along the course of the Euphrates, nearly equidistant in intervals when projected against the ancient shoreline. This spacing implies deliberate geodesy, a mapping of rule as a harmonic of geography. Kingship, perhaps, was not political territory, but spatial resonance, arranged along the river as a mirror of celestial order. The flood's surge erases these cities, but the pattern lingers beneath the sand. Such precision invites reconsideration of what the gods in the text may have been. Divine beings of myth could be recollections of extraordinary ancestors, engineers, astronomers, survivors from an older epoch, possessing techniques so advanced that later generations could only describe them as supernatural. Their extended lifespans might represent continuity of knowledge rather than biological life. Each king, a custodian of mathematics, hydraulic systems, and astronomical data preserved like sacred code. The strongest evidence remains the tone of the list itself. It is unemotional, bureaucratic, detached from theology. Its scribe did not embellish, he recorded. The sequence of rains and the calm statement of catastrophe suggest not myth-making, but accounting. After the flood, he simply begins again. Kingship descends once more, now to Kish. The formality is almost eerie, as if humanity accepted the rhythm of erasure and return as part of cosmic law. Look closely, and every copy of the list begins to diverge slightly. Later, Babylonian and Assyrian versions shorten or rearrange reigns, but preserve the structure. This suggests oral continuation across centuries, a text so heavily guarded in meaning that no dynasty dared omit it. Its constancy resembles the repetition of a ritual formula whose full purpose is forgotten, but whose recitation sustains the world nonetheless. There is a sentence in some copies that rarely attracts attention. Their rule was in Eridu. That city, ancient even by Sumerian standards, has been unearthed as a ceremonial complex built in multiple phases, each upon the ruins of the former. Below the youngest sanctuary lie older foundations of astounding symmetry, aligned to solstitial sunrise. Each rebuild copied the last, precisely, down to the angle of the base slabs. Restoration, not invention, again returns as theme. When the flood line finally rises on the tablet, it erases not just rulers, but epochs. The phrasing is cold. Then the flood swept over. That is the end of the pre-diluvian section. No lamentation follows, only silence and a double spacing before the new sequence begins. The absence of emotion is what makes it terrifying. The scribe did not mourn. He recorded, then continued. In that continuity hides the true genius of the human species, the capacity to remember structure even when meaning drowns. The King List, therefore, stands as both warning and monument. It is humanity's earliest chronicle of cyclical amnesia. Between its wedges of cuneiform lies an admission that power, longevity, and authority all depend on remembrance, not conquest. Each flood resets the ledger. Each attempt at civilization recovers what preceded. We think of history as arrow, but the clay declares it circle. If we strip the myth and read the list as data, a haunting symmetry emerges. The pre-flood king's reigns, when converted through Sumerian units into astronomical cycles, correspond with precessional numbers, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that defines ages in the heavens. The flood becomes both a terrestrial disaster and a celestial transition, marking the turning of an age. The kings ruled in rhythm with the stars, and they vanished when the heavens changed alignment. Perhaps that is why the list survives millennium after millennium. The ancients encoded in it the knowledge that eras end, and that every end feels absolute only until the next return. What they feared most was not destruction, but forgetfulness. The flood was inevitable, amnesia was not. To remember was to rebuild. As you hear these words, consider the silence that separates each age of humanity. Beneath our cities may lie others, beneath our myths, other histories, beneath our confidence, other fragilities. The flood that ended their world is a mirror awaiting ours. Behind the bureaucratic tone of ancient clay, the message endures. Before the flood, civilization ruled the earth. After it, civilization began again, exactly where it had ended, as though the waters had washed but not erased the blueprint of memory. It is no larger than a man's hand, rough-edged and faded, the colour of old bone. Its surface is etched with neat columns of cuneiform and streaks of time. Scholars gave it a name that sounds more like a code than an artifact, Plimpton 322. Yet what it holds is stranger than any myth, a list of mathematical relationships that should have been centuries beyond its makers. When first examined, the tablet appeared to be an inventory, perhaps an accountant's ledger, but the pattern of numbers resisted simple interpretation. Rows decreased systematically, while ratios between columns obeyed a logic invisible to casual inspection. Soon, a mathematician recognized the relationships as exact expressions of right triangles, sets of numbers that satisfy what we now call the Pythagorean theorem. Millennia before a man named Pythagoras was even imagined. Plimpton 322 was created in Babylon sometime around 3,800 years ago. The writing is sexagesimal, base 60, a system built not from convenience but cosmic harmony. Each row encodes a triple. One number squared equals the sum of the squares of two others. These are not approximations. They are accurate, deliberate, and arranged with bureaucratic precision. Whoever wrote them understood geometry not as abstraction, but as measurement of reality itself. For generations, historians explained the tablet as an accidental artifact, perhaps the practice notes of a clever scribe who noticed a curious pattern while organizing grain data. But the density of order inside the tablet betrays that notion. Its sequence reveals trigonometric reasoning refined like modern tables of signs. Each value correlates with an angle, each proportion forming part of a larger system used for surveying land, designing temples, and predicting astronomical motion. The pattern is too elegant to be an accident. Imagine the scene. A scholar in terracotta robes leans over clay softened in water, stylus poised. Behind him lies a shelf stacked with similar tablets, tablets of law, of stars, of measures. But this one is different. It whispers of a geometry that connects heaven and earth. Each number inscribed by the scribe's steady hand mirrors a triangle drawn long before Euclid, repeating proportions known to those who watch the stars move along the horizon. Geometry here is theology, space measured to honor the divine alignment of the cosmos. The strange thing about the tablet is not its content, but its timing. Ancient Babylonia was supposed to be practical, not theoretical. Farmers and merchants did arithmetic, not trigonometry. And yet, in this fragment, dated centuries before Greek schools and Egyptian stone manuals, appears a system of calculation capable of describing motion, distance, and celestial rhythm. The clay should not know this language, and yet it speaks it fluently. Most cuneiform mathematics dealt with the tangible, methods for dividing fields, distributing rations, scaling construction projects. But Plimpton 322 displays a sophistication alien to commerce. It focuses entirely on proportion rather than quantity. Ratios, not totals, dominate its logic. That alone places it outside the expected intellectual framework of its age. The scribe was not counting grain. He was counting relationships, distances unseen yet perfectly measurable in theory. When modern scholars reconstructed the sequences mathematically, they discovered that each pair of numbers represented a side and diagonal of right triangles formed by slope ratios. In simple terms, the tablet is a list of trigonometric data long before trigonometry existed as a word. The system produces results entirely consistent with modern understanding, within negligible error. It is, in essence, the oldest known trigonometric table on Earth. But what use would such a table serve nearly 4 millennia ago? There is an unsettling possibility. It functioned as an engineer's manual. The pyramidal ziggurats of Sumer and Babylon adhered to geometric precisions that required exact gradients. To elevate a terrace perfectly aligned to the stars and proportional to cardinal orientation demanded mathematical discipline. Perhaps Plimpton 322 was not theory, but blueprint, an ancestral engineer's reference chart preserved in clay. If true, that transforms our understanding of early civilization completely. For this tablet implies a lineage of geometry older than recorded history, rediscovered in fragments each time the world rebuilt. Writing on clay becomes a translation of inherited formulae, passed down from a forgotten age and encoded again by those who did not invent it, but remembered how it should look. Civilization, in this reading, does not invent mathematics. It translates memory into numbers. Pause and imagine holding that tablet now. The wedge marks still carry the heartbeat of precision. Your eyes trace each row, descending, methodical, hypnotic. The numbers hum with internal resonance, as if arranged according to an unseen rhythm. Somewhere, long before the scribe pressed his stylus, another set of hands once carved similar proportions, perhaps upon stone or metal, perhaps in another tongue entirely. The clay carries inheritance through silence. Mathematics, in its essence, leaves no fossils. It does not decay. It only disappears when forgotten. Yet here, in grey-brown clay, mathematics left fingerprints. The data inscribed are too refined to be primitive. The scribe understood reciprocal pairs and square roots, concepts we consider advanced education. His civilization encoded such skill casually, perhaps without realizing the depth of what they preserved. Knowledge had survived a catastrophe, not evolved after it. Scholars still debate the purpose of the tablet. Some argue it originated from scribal schools. Others insist it catalogued celestial observations. What remains unchallenged is its precision. Its creators employed a base 60 system designed for divisibility across natural cycles. 12 months, 360 degrees, 60 minutes. Their arithmetic synchronized human measurement with cosmic rhythm. The unity of heaven and mathematics is not philosophical poetry. It is structural inheritance hidden in calculation. Now listen beneath the rational argument to what the artifact whispers. The numbers correspond to abstract truth beyond culture. They describe the stable relationships between sides of a triangle, a geometry existing whether or not humanity observes it. The Sumerians recorded permanence in mutable material. Clay may crack. Mathematics does not. In that paradox lies the deepest irony of civilization. The temporary medium becomes vessel for eternal law. When Greek scholars later formulated geometry formally, they followed paths already walked. The Pythagorean triples were rediscovery, not revelation. The sequence found in Plimpton 322 proves that the understanding of space and angle was global property long before Western history acknowledged it. The idea that a right triangle's sides encode order belongs not to one era, but to the continuity of human memory, which means the Babylonian scribe was remembering far older teachers. You might wonder how such abstract sophistication could vanish. The answer stares back through time. Floods, collapses, and erasures stripped not only cities, but schools. Each reset forced survivors to rebuild practical disciplines first: agriculture, law, trade. Philosophy and theory are luxuries of stability. The mathematical corpus dried into mud, surviving only as fragments like this tablet. When rediscovered, the meaning appeared alien because the lineage had been interrupted. Consider that interruption, the silence of forgetting. Between the making of Plimpton 322 and its rediscovery in the 20th century, thousands of years passed. Countless civilizations rose and fell, reinventing geometry again and again, unaware that their predecessors had already solved the same puzzles. History, it seems, moves in circles of rediscovery. The tablet does not surprise mathematicians because of its content. It terrifies them because of its implication, that intelligence is cyclic, not cumulative. If this was indeed a fragment of a larger set, perhaps dozens more charts once existed, recording data for builders, priests, and astronomers. What would it mean if across the ancient world, similar mathematical tablets formed a network of precision stretching from Babylon to Egypt, Indus to Andes? The design of pyramids, the ratios of temples, the recurrence of 60 divisions across cultures, these may stem from a single algorithmic heritage shared through lost exchange before the Great Flood severed connection. Hold that thought, a mathematics born not from chance, but restoration. The scribes may have viewed their numbers not as invention, but as remembrance offered to the divine. Each equation was an act of praise, a means to imitate cosmic construction itself. Their computations mirrored the architecture of the heavens, the arcs of planets, the tilt of Earth, the geometry of sunrise over ziggurat steps. The clay becomes invocation, not chalkboard. The unsettling conclusion is that Plimpton 322 could represent the ghost of an earlier civilizations. The Sumerians did not conceive these numbers. They copied them from older sources whose knowledge was partly understood and partly sacred. The uniformity of sexagesimal mathematics across regions implies a pre-existing consistency, as if every culture remembered the same rhythm with different instruments. This is restoration again, the pattern of recovery after forgetting. It is easy to dismiss mystery as coincidence. Yet coincidence repeated becomes evidence of design. The alignment between mathematics and myth throughout ancient texts suggests collective memory of a predecessor culture that measured heaven directly. The Babylonians may have inherited formulae as survivors inherit rituals, executing them long after meanings fade, preserving patterns without words. Their accuracy, therefore, is not miracle but memory, unbroken by logic. Imagine walking through the archives of a modern museum and seeing that small tablet under glass. Its label marks it as artifact, its numbers printed in sterile transcription. But if you listen quietly, past the hum of air conditioners and museum footsteps, you might hear it, not sound, but weight. The weight of precision carried through millennia, the persistence of ratio despite ruin. Those tiny wedges hold the hum of a civilization that measured the cosmos and waited for someone to notice. The clay's surface fractures like dried skin, yet its message remains exact. In it, we can sense a mind that believed measurement was a form of prayer. The tablet suggests that even after catastrophe, the act of counting, angles, stars, distances, was a way to restore harmony. To number the world properly was to realign it with its lost order. The truest faith of the ancients was numerical. So perhaps the real question isn't how the Babylonians created such mathematics so early, but what they were trying to preserve. The sexagesimal code, the preoccupation with triangulation, the relentless pursuit of accuracy. These were instruments in rebuilding a shattered world. The scribe's pen was archaeology in advance, recording for those who would one day rediscover what had already been known. Each mark in the clay is both an end and a beginning. The mystery of Plimpton 322 is not its numbers, but its memory. It reminds us that intelligence survives not through progress alone, but through endurance. Civilizations die. Proportions do not. Perhaps when we read the wedge marks today, we are hearing the echo of a voice older than Sumer, older than the flood, older than names. The tablet of numbers that should not exist does not challenge mathematics. It challenges history, asking if the study of the past is nothing more than remembering what the clay already knew. Somewhere in the dim light of a museum vault rests a broken clay tablet, its edges scorched and worn. To most, it looks no different from thousands of others catalogued among the relics of Babylon. But within its fractured lines lies something that defied the timeline of human knowledge, a record of the sky rendered with impossible accuracy. This tablet does not chart stars as seen, but as calculated, predicting their positions across centuries. It is known by no grandiose name, only a museum number. Its script records paths of the moon and the inner planets according to an arithmetic so complex that for decades, even experts dismissed it as symbolic. But when a physicist reinterpreted the data, its pattern revealed the unmistakable trace of precessional intelligence, awareness of the long, slow wobble of Earth's axis, a cycle spanning nearly 26,000 years. Somehow the ancients had measured time not merely in generations but in epochs. The discovery tore a quiet fracture in the narrative of progress. Until that point, history told us that precise astronomy began with the Greeks, that the motions of the planets became mathematical only in the age of Hipparchus and beyond. Yet the clay argued otherwise. The Babylonians of the second millennium before our era tracked celestial cycles using calculated time intervals, not direct observation alone. They understood prediction, itself the purest form of scientific thought. Their notation was bureaucratic but transcendent. Columns of numbers, alternating with small annotations indicating appearance and disappearance of celestial bodies. But behind those ledger-like marks hid an intelligence capable of translating the behavior of heaven into arithmetic symmetry. When the data were mapped, they aligned perfectly with modern measurements of lunar variation and planetary conjunction. Such precision could only have arisen from centuries of accumulated, systematic observation, or from a preserved method older than Babylon itself. Imagine one of those astronomer scribes standing on the roof of a ziggurat, the desert tremoring silently beneath the night. The horizon is vast. Constellations march their appointed routes above a city, breathing incense and dust. With a stylus dipped in careful ink, the scholar notes the moon's disappearance, the return of Venus, the minute shift in the rising star of Orion. But his mind is not rooted to that night. He is computing thousands of cycles ahead, predicting alignments his descendants will never live to witness. That act of perception is both beautiful and terrifying, for it implies a continuity of discipline that defies the fragility of human memory. The alignment of the stars and the turning of the heavens became a ledger of divine order. When these men wrote the sky, they were not describing. They were participating. To measure celestial motion was to confirm that the cosmos still followed the same laws observed before the flood, the same heaven inherited, not invented. The ancient tablet's content corresponds with what we call the synodic cycles of the moon and Venus, the intervals marking each body's return to the same relative position. Those cycles operate on scales of decades, requiring accurate accumulation of data generation after generation. A single mistake would cascade into inaccuracy, yet the tablet bears consistency across hundreds of iterations. Neither error nor accident can explain that endurance. It is a work of memory entrusted through ritual. Archaeoastronomy calls these patterns mathematical astronomy, but the ancients may have regarded them as sacred architecture. Their temples were built not merely to worship, but to measure. The long corridors of observatory temples aligned to horizon points, where light or star once appeared in perfect cadence. Through these stone tunnels, civilizations observed immortality, the return of the same pattern after the chaos of flood and fire. The celestial map, therefore, was not theory, it was covenant. When the old empires perished, the clay maps survived buried beneath ruin. Yet their logic continued to echo in later texts. from Chaldean star lists to Egyptian deacons to Mayan and Vedic stellar calendars. Across continents, the same obsession manifests: the need to predict the rhythm of light, to secure certainty amid impermanence. The resemblance suggests not coincidence, but shared descent from an older astronomical system, perhaps one that preceded history itself. Consider the implications of precession within such a worldview. Every 26 millennia, the Earth completes a slow rotation of its axis, shifting the stars' positions relative to the horizon. To recognize that requires comparison across multiple ages, impossible without either continuous records or inherited data. The tablet seems to encode that awareness subtly, through numerical cycles that only make sense when interpreted as precessional fractions. These are not primitive guesses, they are fragments of a cosmic clock. The deeper we analyze, the less plausible the accepted timeline appears. The tablet presupposes not individual genius, but institutional, an ancient observatory network exchanging data through consistent numeration. Babylonian scribes recorded long-term planetary observations as state documents, maintained through centuries of dynastic upheaval. Yet one wonders, did they themselves originate this tradition, or were they merely continuing an archive already ancient when their ancestors began writing? The texture of the clay seems to answer in silence. Its signs repeat formulas recognizable across multiple sites: extended ratios, tabulated predictions, corrections for atmospheric refraction. None of these innovations should belong to an era without telescopes or formal physics. And yet they exist, not in fragments of myth or allegory, but in curated mathematical code. The sky on these tablets was not sky at all. It was database. Look again at the phrase, "as above, so below." Modern ears reduce it to mystic proverb, but to the astronomers of Mesopotamia, it was literal instruction. The geometry of heaven dictated the geometry of Earth. If one could measure the interval between the rising of planets, one could derive the proportions of temples. Every major sanctuary of Babylon exhibits symmetry aligned to celestial cycles, as though carving heaven into the ground ensured cosmic stability. The temple became a clock in stone. This connection between architecture and astronomy hints at something more disturbing. If the builders inherited not just design but astronomical data, then each structure doubles as a repository, a physical manifestation of an older memory system. The ziggurat stairways may encode sidereal cycles in their steps, while the orientation of their corners mirrors stellar rise. To climb them was to ascend time itself, to reenact the pattern that keeps the heavens turning. During the excavation of Nineveh's library, archaeologists discovered tablets describing star maps older than the empire that preserved them. These maps contain constellations that do not match the sky seen today, as if they recorded a heaven displaced by centuries of axial drift. Astronomers realized that these anomalies correspond exactly to the precession rate of the Earth, calculated backward to around the 4th millennium before our era. The observation was global. The ancients had registered time on a cosmic rather than human scale. But what purpose did this serve to people whose immediate lives depended on harvest and trade? The answer may lie not in utility, but in philosophy. To predict celestial return is to transcend mortality. The heavens became the measure of endurance against collapse. Civilizations fell, temples decayed, but the star patterns would rewrite themselves endlessly. Recording them gave meaning to ruin. Writing was less communication than resurrection, the assurance that after every flood, light would return at the same interval as before. Imagine now the night the tablet was finished. The scribe smooths the clay, checks the intervals one last time, then presses the seal of the temple into its surface. The wind outside smells of ash and salt water. Rumors of failing harvest fill the air. Yet inside that moment, knowledge crystallizes. The stars have been numbered again, the path of Venus predicted into futures no one will live to see. The act feels redemptive. Inscribe the motion, and perhaps reality will obey the pattern. In this way, the astronomical tablets became the conscience of civilization. They reminded humanity of alignment, how easily heaven and earth could fall out of harmony. Flood myths, in that sense, were not punishments from gods, but celestial warnings. To neglect the rhythm of the stars was to invite dissonance. Relearning those rhythms was salvation. Every recalculated cycle represented a return to balance. When modern scientists translated these tablets, they were astonished by the accuracy of their data. The lunar anomalies correspond to modern values within fractions of a degree. The planetary periods align exactly with present-day figures extracted by electronic calculation. But perhaps the most haunting discovery lies not in precision, but duration. The numbers were refined gradually, not randomly, suggesting ongoing correction over centuries. Someone watched, measured, remembered, and updated, as if maintaining a covenant of observation passed from flood to flood. This revelation challenges our assumption of linear advancement. Knowledge of such scope demands both tools and philosophy. While the ancients lacked lenses, they had patience, a resource more powerful than machinery. Through persistence, not technology, they captured subtle truths about the mechanics of the cosmos. If they could detect precession without telescopes, it implies something larger. The human mind itself was once a more disciplined instrument for perceiving long time. The idea of an impossible sky thus becomes less fantasy, more archaeology of thought. The stars recorded on those tablets may not match our sky precisely, because the Earth's position and humanity's memory have shifted since then. What we see now is the residue of forgotten alignment, an echo of their precise timekeeping, blurred by our amnesia. Their heaven was our prehistory, yet it measured the same eternal clock. When you read the translation of the tablet today, the columns seem sterile, mechanical, but within those sequences beats the rhythm of devotion. Each figure of degrees and days mirrors heartbeat intervals of human discipline, civilizations counting the pulse of eternity. The tablet is less about astronomy than about hope, the hope that by calculating heaven, we ensure Earth remains legible. So the map of the impossible sky is not a mystery of stars, but a mirror of memory. It tells us that civilizations may be born, destroyed, and rebuilt, but the celestial order remains, waiting to be rediscovered like buried light. Those who recorded it long ago did not expect understanding, they expected survival. The sky was their library, its constellations the grammar of continuity, and when their world fell silent beneath flood and fire, the clay kept the coordinates safe. Now we, too, read those coordinates as prophecy. The same stars still pass above, indifferent yet perfectly punctual. Their cycles continue while our own cities erode. Perhaps that is the final lesson encoded in the clay, that the true heritage of humanity is not in the monuments that crumble, but in the equations that remain correct. The heavens have not forgotten us. Only we have forgotten how to read the map they left behind. The code of Ur-Nammu sits in fragments carved into black basalt that once gleamed like wet ink. At first glance, it is a legal text, lists of offences followed by measured compensations, a ledger of justice for a civilization newly organised. but beneath its formal tone whispers another message. The law is not invention, it is recollection, a reassembling of something older, recovered from a world drowned in silence. Imagine the scribe chiseling those rules into stone. Each stroke echoes with the mechanical rhythm of tradition rather than innovation. The terms are precise, unemotional, derived from a bureaucratic precision that predates the city itself. It is as though he were restoring an operating system, not creating a moral code. The lettering does not rejoice in discovery, it mourns what it replaces. The code predates Hammurabi by centuries, yet it mirrors his logic perfectly. It organizes society according to responsibility, hierarchy, and consequence, implying that civilization only functions by remembering how it had done so before. The first laws to survive recorded history appear already refined. No infancy, no experimental phase. They emerge structured, mathematical, aligned with cosmic analogies as if reflecting the cycles of heaven, laid out in judicial form. Consider what this implies, that justice itself may have been inherited. The Sumerians claimed that their laws descended from the gods, not metaphorically, but literally, that divine administration had been re-established on earth after the flood. The ruler was not creator but mediator, enforcing a covenant between humankind and an unseen order. Law and cosmos mirrored one another. The stability of one assured the endurance of the other. Ur-Nammu's code functioned not merely as political foundation, but as reconstruction manual. Its very syntax suggests replication of pre-existing rituals, penalties for crimes, standards for weights, procedures for offerings. Each clause reads less like command and more like record. This is what was done before. The wording rejects improvisation. It is archival. To understand the code, we must abandon the modern distinction between sacred and civil. In Mesopotamia, the courtroom was extension of the temple, and the temple itself mirrored the architecture of the heavens. The measurements of altars corresponded to the lunar cycle, the placement of stairways to solar azimuth. Law was geometry, enacted through human behavior. The same precision that governed trigonometry and architecture also mapped morality. Archaeologists examining the fragments noted the absence of divine threats. Punishment came not from wrath, but from imbalance. Sin, in that oldest lexicon, meant deviation from proportion. To steal was to distort exchange. To kill was to subtract from equilibrium. The offender was not damned but destabilized, and the code's penalties were means of restoring cosmic measure. It is justice as mathematics, not emotion. If we imagine the origins of civilization as chaos giving birth to order, the code of Ur-Nammu tells the opposite story. Order came first. Chaos followed when the order was forgotten. The stone tablets were attempts to halt the dissolution of memory. Every rule carved into basalt was an act of restoration, a reminder of procedures that once kept the world coherent. Society was not inventing stability. It was invoking a blueprint long buried beneath the flood's sediment. The language of the code holds this tension between memory and obedience. Its verbs carry double meanings: to restore, to return, to measure again. Justice was an act of remembrance, enacted through repetition of laws that were themselves repetitions. In this way, civilization became ritualized memory, living only through the accuracy of its imitations. Forgetfulness was the true crime. One clause reads of precise compensation measured in silver for bodily injury. At first, this seems pragmatic, yet beneath the economics lies metaphysics. Silver, reflective and lunar, symbolized purity of measure. To balance wrongdoing with metal was to realign moral imbalance with astronomical proportion. Punishment became cosmic calibration. Law was not about guilt, it was about frequency. Imagine standing in the grand court of Ur, where columns of baked brick towered like petrified prayers. Citizens gathered beneath banners of woven reed, the scent of bitumen and oil heavy in the air. A case concludes. Compensation is ordered not with anger but formula. The verdict sounds like ritual recitation. Justice in this world was arithmetic choreography, the human city performing the balancing motions of heaven. Modern readers find this system cold, but perhaps warmth has deceived us. In a cosmos that viewed balance as sacred, compassion meant preserving ratio, not emotion. The code's precision reveals reverence, not cruelty. Its laws assume that without constant recalibration, the city collapses. Stability depended on remembering exactly how the world once worked, echoing that original divine symmetry. When later kings like Hammurabi issued their own legal tablets, they cited divine commission. Yet even they were restoring, not legislating. Their codes replicate Ur-Nammu's structure, changing the surface drapery, but keeping the underlying rhythm. Law, once revealed, could not be invented again. It was eternal recurrence. Civilization played back the formula, adjusting details but never the proportions. There is a word used repeatedly in these tablets: order. Not social order, but cosmic order, the rightness embedded in design. It suggests that early governance emerged from astronomy itself. The same minds plotting the stars simultaneously plotted justice. Ethics was modelled on the heavens. Consistency was the moral absolute. Each judgment thereby reconnected the human and the celestial, reminding all present that law was not man's privilege, but his responsibility to the memory of perfection. Now imagine reading one of those tablets freshly uncovered, caked with dust and the scent of the long-dead river. As the cuneiform emerges under the archaeologist's brush, you see formulas of cause and effect etched deeper than belief. The flood had not erased them. They waited silent inside the stone's memory. Civilization began anew by reactivating what had been written before. What if those early lawgivers did not conceive their codes from scratch, but recovered them through ritual remembrance, dream, divination, or rewritten fragments? The tablets themselves occasionally invoke a phrase, from before. That phrase collapses time, acknowledging awareness of a continuum beyond dynasty. Language becomes bridge between epochs. The law itself becomes a conduit of lost instruction. Some scholars suggest that early Mesopotamian rulers conceived of kingship as stewardship over justice, not authority to alter it. The ruler's task was to keep the cosmic machine running. When human memory failed, they looked upward, to the heavens whose patterns predated creation itself. The gods in this view were metaphors for processes, forces that demanded maintenance. By enforcing law, humanity mimicked their oversight. Injustice was cosmic entropy. Hold that thought. The gods as engineers, the kings as maintenance technicians of the universe. Every verdict, every record in clay, served as recalibration of the cosmic apparatus. In this theatre of balance, the code was both manual and prayer, both instrument and scripture. The forgotten gods were not beings. They were the equations that sustained the world. And Ur-Nammu's code was the attempt to remember their syntax. Consider how this transforms the notion of sin. Sin becomes error, measurable, rectifiable. The entire cosmology of guilt dissolves into arithmetic. The stone does not accuse, it corrects. This philosophy explains how such advanced bureaucracy emerged so early. The scribe was not bookkeeper but caretaker of equilibrium. His ledger kept not coins but harmonies. A fragment from later Akkadian tradition expands on this worldview. It praises a ruler who set in order the measures of heaven and earth. That statement, read literally, defines kingship as standardization. Governance meant making human rhythm identical to cosmic rhythm. The ruler embodied the bridge between sky and clay. When he failed, floods came. When he succeeded, abundance followed. The law thus functioned as weatherproofing for civilization's soul. Think then of what we call morality. Our version assumes invention, evolution, conversation. Theirs assumed inheritance. To be moral was to remember accurately, to repeat celestial architecture precisely. The less one remembered, the closer one came to chaos. Each legal tablet, therefore, was an antidote against forgetting, a neurological prosthesis for a civilization rebuilding its brain after catastrophe. When archaeologists display these tablets behind glass, their translations flatten into mere legalism, but the symbols still glow with quiet intelligence. The clay lines shimmer not from artistry, but from resonance. They describe a system that still underlies ours. Modern courts, contracts, currencies all repeat the same foundation. Measured exchange, preserving balance. The voice of Ur-Nammu reverberates in every transaction, unseen yet undefeated by time. If we peel away the modern separation between myth and method, we hear another message encoded within these laws. The forgotten gods of the title were not deities in the mythic sense. They were natural laws personified. Gravity, balance, correspondence, forces worshipped through imitation. To obey them was to preserve civilization. To defy them was to invite erasure. The code does not demand faith, only memory. Picture again the writer kneeling before basalt, carving letters that outlived palaces. His world has risen from flood and ruin. The sun sets upon the edge of a restored horizon. He works slowly, with mathematical patience, shaping justice back into being. Around him, workers rebuild walls while priests realign calendars to solstice. A civilization reborn writes its survival strategy in stone. It is not creating ethics, it is reactivating instruction. The code of Ur-Nammu thereby joins the other silent witnesses of humanity's recurring genesis. Its words remind us that progress is repair, not creation. Every age that rises from ashes does so by remembering the ratios that once balanced heaven and earth. The tablet's calm tone masks the desperation of those who wrote it. They knew that forgetting again would lead to chaos again. Civilization endures only while its laws echo the harmony of the stars. Perhaps this is why, even today, we write our laws in documents meant to last beyond us. The ink has changed, but the impulse is the same, to preserve equilibrium across the flood of time. We are still inscribing on clay, only more fragile, digital, transient. The forgotten gods of balance still wait for remembrance each time we measure, weigh, or judge. And if we listen closely beneath the static of modern language, their old rhythm still pulses, equal parts memory, mathematics, and fear of forgetting. There is a stone fragment, small enough to fit in the palm yet heavy with a gravity of its own. It was found near the ruins of Nineveh, carved not with words but with lines and depressions that seem almost accidental. But when illuminated by angled light, the grooves reveal geometry, a pattern that mirrors the constellation of Orion, almost perfectly proportioned to the heavens, as they would have appeared thousands of years before recorded history. A stone that speaks, but only to those who understand the language of stars. At first, scholars treated it as a map of worship, the crude cosmogram of a priestly cult. but closer analysis of the spacing between each incision undermined that view. The precision was mathematical, not ornamental. Distances between carved stars scaled perfectly with angular separations in the night sky. With intolerance so fine it approximated modern measurement. The question, once again, was inevitable. How could people so ancient carve heaven into stone with such accuracy? The fragment bears no inscription to date it directly, only patina and mineral residue. Yet the archaeological context places it near layers predating the zenith of the Assyrian Empire. Some have suggested it is much older still, an artifact rediscovered and revered by later hands. The grooves show reworking, resurfacing, the signs of someone trying to trace or restore an already ancient design. It is in essence a restoration bound in stone, not an invention. Orion has always haunted human imagination. Across Mesopotamia, Egypt, and even pre-Columbian America, the three stars of its belt resurface again and again in mythology and architecture. The same alignment appears in the layout of pyramids, temples, and ancient observatories separated by oceans and time. Its recurrence suggests neither coincidence nor communication, but memory, an inherited pattern reaching back to a forgotten source. The stone fragment from Nineveh may well be one of the earliest echoes of that ancestral alignment. Imagine the ancient artisan kneeling before raw rock. He does not guess, he recalls. The stars to him are not distant fires but coordinates, markers of divine architecture. His chisel strikes the surface with ritual consistency, replicating a celestial order long whispered by memory. When the stone breaks centuries later, its message remains. A map that connects heaven's symmetry to Earth's geometry. We have come to understand that early cultures often encoded astronomy in art and temple construction. But this fragment goes beyond symbolism. Its mapping of Orion's position corresponds not to the sky of its supposed period, but to an epoch thousands of years earlier, when those stars rose slightly different along the horizon due to precession. The artifact, therefore, memorializes an observation made long before Nineveh existed. It remembers the sky of another civilization's night. How could such data survive between cataclysms and rebuildings? Only through ritual transmission, a chain of apprentices preserving geometric ratios without ever grasping their origin. The temple masons who rebuilt after the flood may have thought they were decorating. Instead, they were perpetuating scientific memory. In their carvings, myth and measurement merged. The stone became a patient messenger for knowledge too fragile to trust to parchment or voice. Modern analysis suggests the proportions on the fragment correspond to celestial latitudes expressed through base 60 divisions, the same mathematical logic found in Babylonian astronomy tablets. Yet this piece predates their system, implying that the sexagesimal structure may have been inherited itself from earlier astronomer builders. The fragment therefore acts as a genetic fossil of mathematics, encoded in iconography. What others mistook for worship was actually memory disguised as art. Skeptics dismiss such alignments as confirmation bias, the pattern-seeking instinct of modern minds. Yet the recurrence of identical motifs across continents weakens the argument of chance. Orion, specifically, appears attached to myths of divine builders, descents from heaven, and resurrection after catastrophe. The same three stars that guided the ancient stonecutters reappear in canyon etchings and tomb ceilings, suggesting a singular myth, one origin retold endlessly through different skies. To carve Orion into stone is to admit a relationship between heaven and architecture. The ancients built their world according to celestial templates, their sacred structures doubling as observatories. This was not vanity, but necessity. The stars represented stability, the unbetraying cycles amid human uncertainty. Aligning architecture to them meant anchoring civilization against oblivion. Each temple echoed the structure of the sky, and by reconstructing it, humanity reasserted its participation in that cosmic order. Hold that vision. A priest ascending a ziggurat, torch in hand, the stone pattern of Orion engraved before him. Above, the real constellation gleams through thin desert cloud. The parallel is perfect, the heavens above mirrored exactly below. In that symmetry lives reassurance, the belief that the flood can never erase what the sky retains. The stars become archive, the stone becomes translation. Archaeologists studying the Nineveh fragment noticed faint depressions around its perimeter, possibly coordinate markers or construction reference points. When modeled digitally, those points reconstruct an entire field of constellations, overlapping with Taurus and portions of the Milky Way. The design matches sky positions observable nearly 12,000 years in the past. If authentic, the fragment preserves memory beyond history's accepted threshold. It undermines every chronology we have built atop dust. To the ancient Mesopotamians, Orion was not merely a hunter but the axis of resurrection, sometimes personified as a god descending to restore order after the flood. His rising at dawn marked both calendar renewal and symbolic rebirth of civilization. By embedding his image in stone, humanity inscribed the promise of return, not only of stars but of knowledge itself. The stone, then, is not map, but prophecy. When we consider this from a psychological lens, the act becomes clearer. The trauma of world-ending deluge demanded redemptive imagery. The constellations offered that, fixed, cyclical, untouched by terrestrial ruin. To carve them was to defy the flood's finality, to prove that something finite could still mirror infinity. Through astronomy, ancient humanity reasserted its claim to continuity. Across later cultures, the motif continues. Egyptian pyramids align their three central structures along Orion's belt. Temples at Giza open precisely towards Sirius and Alnitak, the star associated with celestial rebirth. Thousands of years separated these monuments from the Nineveh fragment, yet they repeat the same stellar geometry. Knowledge persisted, transformed and resurged, each time appearing as coincidence to eyes unwilling to admit continuity. The most unsettling question is not how they did this, but why they needed to. Why did civilizations so distant in time and space replicate the sky according to the same ratios? Perhaps the answer lies in fear, the fear that forgetting heaven's map meant risking another fall. The stone ensured protection, its patterns serving as lock and reminder. As above, so below was neither creed nor convenience, it was survival protocol. When seen in this light, the Nineveh fragment ceases to be an outlier artifact. It becomes a keystone of humanity's recursive awakening. Every time the Earth forgets, a fragment like this reemerges to whisper coordinates, to remind us that precision once defined faith. Civilizations vanish, but their equations live on through carvings that seem ornamental until someone listens long enough. Look long at the image of Orion as drawn on that tablet. Its symmetry is so clean it almost feels digital. The distances between stars mirror geometric progressions long before geometry was textualized. It is as though an ancient surveyor froze celestial data while knowing the message would not be deciphered for thousands of years. To leave truth in stone is to gamble that future minds will still remember the language of light. Today, we read those lines as scholars, not believers. Yet the sense of awe they generate belongs to the same lineage of devotion. The connection between astronomy and architecture never truly vanished. We have simply replaced stone with concrete and constellations with satellites. Our instruments extend what ancient hands began. In tracing the heavens, we continue their ritual without even realizing it. The fragment from Nineveh reminds us that the stone and the star speak the same dialect: order. Beneath dust and erosion lies the meticulous continuity of intellect. Civilization, through all its collapses, clings to this pattern instinctively. We rebuild according to ratios hidden in our collective memory, erecting skyscrapers aligned subconsciously to the geometry of older heavens. The act repeats: align, measure, mirror, recall. In the end, the stone that spoke of the stars is not an anomaly, it is testimony. It tells us that humanity once measured time not in lifetimes, but in cosmic breaths. It vindicates the idea that we are not inventors of knowledge, but custodians of its debris. The Orion stones of ancient cultures were not separate efforts, but scattered verses of a single ancient scripture written in light. As you imagine that small fragment in your hand, its carved depressions glinting faintly under museum lamps, listen closely. The grooves hum in silence. They carry not superstition, but mathematics, not mythology, but instruction. Within them, geometry whispers the story of how we once built a world to match the heavens, and how, perhaps, we will be asked to remember again when the stars change once more. In the mythology of Sumer, there is a figure who does not rule through dominion, but through measurement. His name was Enki, the god of fresh waters, of hidden knowledge, of intricate design. Unlike the warrior deities who conquered by force, Enki's power came from precision. He did not wield thunder, he wielded equations, and through those equations he measured the depths of creation itself. In temple walls and on clay tablets, Enki appears surrounded by rivers flowing in impossibly symmetrical paths. Fish swim beside him, not as decoration, but as coding, symbols of fluid dynamics, of motion governed by unseen law. Builders and priests alike invoked him before beginning their great works, for to measure water was to control life. He was both hydrologist and mathematician, a divine engineer whose tools were numbers and alignment. Among the ruins of Eridu, the city that legend calls the first, archaeologists discovered channels and irrigation systems centuries ahead of their assumed period. Beneath layers of sand lay a network of canals designed with uncanny hydraulic mastery. Its structures maintain gradients so gentle they remain functional even now, when modern models simulate their flow. The builders of Eridu calculated terrain not from guesswork, but from survey. Their understanding of sediment and current reflected practice far older than the city's foundation. If we take mythology seriously, not as fairy tale but as code, then Enki was their memory of an earlier civilization's engineer. His name itself carries linguistic relics of measurement, derived from phrases meaning Lord of the Earth space. That title itself implies geometry, foundation, levelness. Enki measured the world as if it were unstable, an experiment prone to collapse, requiring recalibration. His followers, those early Mesopotamians, were the technicians of inherited balance. Imagine the floodplains spanned with newly dug channels, the workers moving in silent rhythm. Each pool of water is both necessity and offering. The overseer, guided by stellar charts, ensures each canal maintains consistent slope to the horizon. The flow is more than irrigation, it is reenactment. In every measurement of depth, the people of Eridu replayed their god's first act. bringing order out of the deluge. Hydrologists marvel at the accuracy of ancient Mesopotamian levees, especially given the tools available. But perhaps those tools were not truly primitive. Weighted cords, leveling rods, measuring lines, their simplicity belied sophistication. They understood hydrostatic principles long before they were named. The myth of Enki releasing rivers from the underworld might describe, in symbolic form, humanity's rediscovery of controlled water systems after chaos. Myth as engineering manual. In one legend, Enki saves humanity from a second flood, not through prayer, but through mathematics. He instructs a mortal to build a vessel measured by exact proportions, sealed with bitumen at calculated thickness. Survival in this cosmology is not petition, it is precision. To live was to understand ratio. The divine was not mystery, but metric. This concept, God as measure, reverses our understanding of how early people saw divinity. Enki's very essence was calculation made sacred. His temple, the Abzu, symbolized the cosmic aquifer, where all fresh waters originated. But its architecture mirrors hydraulic reality. Multi-tiered foundations designed to prevent seepage, angled drains, subsurface reservoirs. The temple does not mythologize water, it stores it. The boundary between devotion and maintenance dissolves. When viewed through this lens, Enki becomes humanity's first memory of applied. His myths document the translation of chaos into engineering. He codifies not morality, but method, how to measure water, how to predict overflow, how to use geometry to reclaim drowned ground. Civilization became possible only when floods ceased being divine wrath and became predictable recurrence. And it was through Enki's cult that this predictability became ritualized knowledge. The linguistic evidence deepens this interpretation. The Sumerian word for wisdom, me, also meant decree or law, both civic and cosmic. Enki possessed the MEs, blueprints or protocols that governed creation. Among these were the patterns of architecture, writing, metallurgy, and music. All systems bound by ratio. The god's myths depict him distributing these mares to cities like instructions passed down through ages. Knowledge, therefore, was never born. It was reallocated, preserved between cycles of loss. Archaeological layers around Eridu reveal periodic flooding and rebuilding. Each reconstruction adhered to nearly identical design, the same canal alignments, the same distances between temples. There is no evolution of style, only consistency. It is as if every generation accessed a fixed reference, ensuring that even after collapse, the restoration would remain proportionally perfect. They were copying Enki's geometry from memory, or perhaps from something more tangible hidden beneath the silts. The most intriguing of these remnants is a set of stone cores extracted from the lowest levels of Eridu. Their cross-sections display crystalline deposits formed by centuries of regulated water flow. The angles within those deposits mirror trigonometric ratios, as if the canals themselves encoded mathematical constants through natural accumulation. Each layer becomes a record of ongoing maintenance, the earth itself writing the narrative of precision. Through sediment, the gods preserve their archive. To stand in modern Eridu is to feel time collapsing into repetition. The wind moves over dry channels carved 4,000 years before the birth of Christ. Yet if it were to rain hard enough, the water would find those paths again, tracing its inheritance along forgotten geometry. That inevitability is Enki's true magic, engineering so aligned with natural law that even erosion cannot erase it. For him, immortality was not spirit but system. In later myths, Enki defies other gods by aiding humanity, teaching them to measure the earth anew after devastation. He disobeys divine command to destroy man because he knows that ignorance would doom them faster than punishment. His rebellion is intellectual mercy. He saves not through miracle, but through the restoration of knowledge. And in this act, the myth becomes an allegory of civilization's resilience, memory surviving the flood through calculation. Consider for a moment the possibility that Enki's temples were research institutions disguised as sanctuaries. Priests performing sacred rituals might have been hydrologists adjusting sluices and calibrating flows. Their chants and offerings could encode instructions for managing tides. Ritual thus becomes mnemonic engineering, chanting to keep measures exact. Every prayer is also a recalibration. Such duality blurred the line between and spirituality for millennia. When writing emerged, it bore Enki's signature. Wedge marks dividing units, accounting for grain, timing floods. The earliest cuneiform tablets are not legends but spreadsheets, expressions of mathematical devotion. The first writing culture on Earth therefore began as bureaucracy of balance, ensuring that water and bread moved in proper measure. Enki, the silent god of arithmetic mercy, presided over it all. His association with water may also conceal deeper metaphor. Water, like knowledge, flows and evaporates, creates and destroys. It remembers form but not shape, returning endlessly through different courses. For the Sumerians, to honor Enki was to manage that fluidity without losing equilibrium. Through him, they learned that control was temporary, but measurement eternal. What mattered was not possessing knowledge, but maintaining its circulation. When the figure of Enki passed into Akkadian myths, his name changed to Ea, but his traits persisted: the architect, the sounder of depths, the recorder of patterns. He was said to inscribe laws of creation on 7 tablets, perhaps a poetic echo of geological strata holding ancient memory. Each tablet symbolized a layer of instruction buried beneath floodwaters, waiting for rediscovery. Civilization's progress became the gradual retranslation of those tablets into human understanding. To analyze Enki as myth is to miss the deeper function of his story. He is not character but archetype, embodiment of the human drive to measure. Every civilization since has its own Enki: the architect of Egypt, the philosopher of Greece, the mathematician of Alexandria, the engineer of Rome. All serve the same purpose: to stabilize chaos by imposing order through number. Humanity itself is Enki's reflection, an organism that survives only while it measures. The god's great symbol, the fish swimming from water to air, mirrors this transition perfectly. It embodies life adapting between mediums, intelligence evolving between ignorance and comprehension. When flood destroys the world, it is the fish that survives. When the sky clears, it is man who measures its depths once again. Evolution becomes translation, biology becomes geometry. The myth remains accurate in metaphor long after its gods are forgotten. There is a story whispered in later Mesopotamian texts of priests descending into the Abzu to reawaken the laws. They enter the deep caverns beneath the temple, guided by echo and trickle, to reach a chamber of still water reflecting torchlight like the surface of a star. There they chant the proportions of canals and walls, reaffirming the correctness of the world. This was their ritual of remembrance, keeping the geometry alive. Time could not wash it away as long as it was recited. When archaeologists restore ancient basins in Eridu today, they find that water still collects along ancient channels, obeying gradients drawn 4 millennia ago. It is as though the land itself honors the memory of its first surveyor. The physics of flow acknowledges the intention of myth. The god who measured the depths remains undefeated, his ratios continuing to shape puddles and rivers while his worshippers have turned to dust. So who was Enki, truly? A mythic engineer, a cultural composite, or the remembrance of real ancient scientists whose names eroded with time? Perhaps he was all of these at once, the convergence of memory and necessity. In the balance between imagination and measurement lies the survival of knowledge. Enki is not deity, but process, the recursion of intelligence reclaiming the drowned world. The waters that filled the Sumerian plains have long since retreated, yet their patterns endure, invisible until remeasured. This is the true legacy of Enki, civilization as maintenance. Each generation rebuilds irrigation, revises algorithms, recalibrates understanding, and believes itself advanced, forgetting that it is only continuing the work begun when the first channel cut through mud. The god's whisper lingers in the sound of modern pumps and turbines, in the equations that guide satellites, in every calculation that turns liquid chaos into measured flow. In the end, Enki's legacy is not mythological at all. It is structural, embedded in human instinct, the craving to measure, predict, and restore after ruin. The God who measured the depths is still at work through us. Whenever we trace the flow of data, calibrate instruments, or map the oceans, we reenact the ritual carved into clay thousands of years ago. Knowledge remains the only form of salvation that floods cannot drown. Buried under layers of desert dust, beneath the foundations of Uruk and Lagash, lies a geometry that refuses to fade. The ground itself holds a hidden design, the outline of lost structures perfectly aligned with ratios identical to those found later in the pyramids of Egypt. The discovery unsettled archaeologists when satellite imaging and ground-penetrating scans revealed shapes too deliberate to be natural. It was as though architects of the early cities had copied a map, not drawn for them, but remembered from another world. The patterns appeared consistent, rectangular foundations aligned along diagonals pointing to celestial bearings. They extended beyond visible ruins, suggesting city plans written across kilometers of landscape. When reconstructed digitally, the traces formed grids synchronized with cardinal directions, oriented to equinox, sunrises, and solstice points. This alignment cannot be coincidence. It embodies a code of proportion preserved through catastrophe, hidden under centuries of reconstruction. The most curious revelation came when measurements of these subsurface layouts were compared to later monumental architecture along the Nile. The mathematical constants matched, the same lengths, angles, and ratios. The precision of the Egyptian cubit echoes the Sumerian nindan, both deriving from an older base, Sikh system embedded in their cosmology. It was as if two civilizations separated by deserts and time had consulted the same blueprint. The cities were not experiments, they were restorations. Imagine standing amid that desert, dust swirling against instruments that hiss with faint electronic echoes of the past. Beneath your feet run invisible lines defining corridors, chambers, passageways once filled with the sound of human breath. The cities of Uruk and Lagash did not emerge randomly. Their designs repeat like a forgotten melody, one that civilization keeps rewriting with the same essential chords. The rhythm is mathematical, eternal, indifferent to the cultures that rediscover it. The underlying geometry follows harmonic ratios, 3:2, 5 to 4, 8 to 5, the same progressions the Greeks would later ascribe to musical intervals. Yet here, thousands of years earlier, the ratios are applied not to sound, but to space. Temples resonated with these dimensions, their chambers tuned to frequencies that amplified ritual chants. Architecture literally sang. These buildings were both shelters and instruments, harmonizing physical design with acoustic vibration, bridging heaven and earth through resonance. Archaeologists analyzing the subsurface traces noted repetitive spacing between major complexes. The distances corresponded to solar and lunar cycles, expressed through base 60 numeration. In essence, the architecture encoded calendars into its own foundation. Each wall placement marked time. Each temple mirrored celestial rhythm. Civilization began not with chaos, but with synchronization between land and sky. The architects were conducting time through geometry. Urban planning was thus theological, the act of city building a form of cosmological remembrance. When kings of Lagash ordered the reconstruction of ruined temples, their engineers followed layouts preserved through oral tradition. Excavation logs show that newer stone walls align perfectly atop older mud brick foundations, as though the blueprint persisted unconsciously. The sand hid the pattern, but memory did not. The city rebuilt itself according to rules older than its gods. Inside these geometric plans hides another enigma: the absence of error. Ancient construction usually reveals adaptation to terrain, incremental correction, asymmetry born of necessity. But the ruins beneath Uruk maintain consistency across vast scales. Streets converge precisely at pre-calculated angles. Drainage channels follow slope gradients still functional after millennia. It is as if the builders followed instructions derived from instruments more accurate than those available, measurements from an age that had already mastered precision. Some claim these buried ratios suggest a lost master culture, an earlier civilization that mapped the grid before Mesopotamia rose. Others argue the repetition results from human cognition's search for order, an innate geometry reappearing through pattern memory. But the alignment remains unnervingly perfect. The landscape itself becomes manuscript, each dune concealing a sentence in the lost language of architecture. The blueprint is not myth, it is topography. Imagine what it meant for the first archaeologists who realized the depth of the design. The sand yielded not chaos, but plan. Staircases leading nowhere, walls beneath walls, foundations resting upon prior foundations, all identical. History looping into itself like reflections in polished obsidian. In that recursion lies the proof of the restoration thesis: civilization as a copy of an earlier construct. Humanity, consciously or not, reactivates ancient design rather than inventing anew. The ratios between these buried structures carry symbolic weight. The triangle and rectangle interplay mirrors celestial configurations linked to specific zodiacal phenomena. The linearity of streets corresponds to astronomical declination angles. Even the width of courtyards matches resonance frequencies of Earth's natural electromagnetic field. Whether by coincidence or continuity, the same mathematical constants unite architecture and cosmos. The blueprint beneath the sand is a map for rebuilding after loss, a manual written in stone for the next cycle of remembering. If we treat the desert as archive, the dunes become pages. Each layer of sediment records not only artifacts but intention, the decision to preserve proportion beyond comprehension. The planners of Uruk may never have known why the ratios mattered, only that deviation meant danger. Their faith in measurement was inherited, not understood. They obeyed geometry the way others obeyed gods. In Logash, fragments of baked clay tablets found near the buried foundations reference construction rituals, mentioning the lines of heaven brought down to earth. The phrase, found repeatedly across generations, testifies to architectural obedience to sacred geometry. They built as they remembered, not as they imagined. The city's rebirth after flood or war always began by redrawing those lines, measuring by stars, restoring the same grid. Continuity became survival strategy. Consider the magnitude of this revelation, that architecture itself may have been humanity's first data storage. The alignment of foundations acted as mnemonic device, encoding celestial and mathematical intelligence in physical form. Even when literacy failed, the proportions persisted. When myths distorted, the ground held fidelity. The earth, unlike parchment, does not burn easily. Memory found permanence through design. And yet, this continuity bears a haunting implication. If all our sacred sites mirror one another in hidden harmonic ratios, then civilization's apparent diversity may mask a singular origin. The world we inhabit could be the third or fourth iteration of a design far older than history, each flood erasing the story but preserving the pattern. Buried blueprints become seeds. Each age germinates its architecture from previous ruins without realizing it. Every pyramid, ziggurat, and temple is a fossil of memory disguised as monument. The deeper we probe with modern instruments, the more deliberate the pattern becomes. Magnetometric analysis in ancient city cores uncovers intersecting paths identical to geometric configurations used in stone circles and megalithic arrangements thousands of kilometers away. Triangular alignments form across continents, bound by ratios consistent with the so-called golden mean. Either chance has perfect memory, or the earth itself retains the blueprint of civilization, like a scar. Imagine the architects of that lost master plan. They must have faced the same existential dread that shadows us, fear of erasure, of returning to silence. So they encoded permanence not in language, but in geometry, knowing numbers and proportions outlive words. When their cities drowned, their pattern endured in the ground's DNA, invisible yet indestructible. The sands were their ark, carrying design through oblivion. At twilight, when the sun strikes obliquely across these buried grids, faint ridges surface as if the earth exhales memory. Archaeologists walk those lines unknowingly, tracing paths first measured before writing existed. Each footprint becomes repetition of the original act, the remeasurement of creation. Beneath every step in the desert lies an echo of instruction. Rebuild here, measure thus, align again. The discovery reframes the role of the ancient architect. He was not innovator but translator, decoding blueprints the land itself whispered through inherited geometry. His divinity came from his accuracy. His failure risked cosmic imbalance. When cities adhered too strictly to the pattern, they thrived. When they deviated, floods reclaimed them. Civilizations' rise and fall become feedback loops correcting misalignment with the primal template. There is an eerie poetic symmetry in the fact that modern scanning technologies mimic ancient methods conceptually. We, too, measure, map, and align using mathematics born of the same ratios rediscovered endlessly. Our cities stretch in patterns recalling the earliest grid plans beneath Uruk. Urban centers aligned to solar shadows continue the ritual unconsciously. Modernity, beneath its steel and glass, still kneels at the same geometry, restoring, always restoring. So what, then, does the blueprint beneath the sand truly represent? It is testimony to a civilization that refused to let itself vanish entirely. It is the encoded promise of return, of reawakening through measure. Each line drawn under desert silence is an act of defiance against extinction. The architects of the ancient world understood something we have forgotten. Destruction is temporary. Shape is eternal. When wind sweeps over those forgotten foundations, grains of sand rearrange themselves into fleeting patterns that mimic the old lines. Even the landscape seems to collaborate in remembering. The harmony persists, translated from mud brick to dust, from dust to symbol. Beneath the shifting dunes waits an instruction simple and infinite. Measure again, and the past will rise. The blueprint beneath the sand is more than archaeology. It is a mirror of the mind that built us, a geometric ghost whispering that defiance itself is sacred. Each discovery reaffirms the same truth. Our civilizations are not born. They awaken following the quiet guidance of ratios older than memory. The sand conceals more than ruins. It conceals rehearsal. And we, unaware, keep performing the same design through every age, tracing lines that were drawn from the stars themselves. It was small, barely the length of a hand and thin as a leaf of. The marks etched upon its surface pulsed faintly when the archaeologist first lifted it from the sand, as though the clay itself remembered light. It came from an Akkadian site long abandoned, its cuneiform faint but orderly, written in a hand both elegant and urgent. When translated, its words confounded every known myth. It described a time when two suns burned in the same sky. At first, the text seemed metaphorical, a poetic exaggeration for drought or divine punishment. But as scholars compared its vocabulary to astronomical tablets, the tone shifted. The terms it used were not mythic, but observational, recording light phenomena, shadows cast in opposing directions and shifting temperatures inconsistent with a single solar source. The writer had not seen vision or metaphor. He had documented anomaly. The twin lights, the text claimed, heralded both ruin and renewal. Their overlapping radiance burned the horizon, scorching rivers into steam, yet afterward came fertility beyond measure. Plants of impossible hue, nights illuminated like dawn. For centuries this passage was dismissed as delirium until geological strata suggested an episode of extreme solar radiation at precisely the time the tablet described. A real event encoded in myth's skin, a cosmic memory surviving in clay. The Akkadians called one of these lights the true sun, the other the stranger. Its glyph suggests a companion, something that appeared and vanished, unsettling the priests who measured the heavens. In temple chronicles following that epoch, astronomical records change subtly. Calendars stretch by hours, shadow lines curve differently across stele. Humanity tried to reconcile an unspeakable instability in the sky. The tablet, though damaged, preserves the terror of witnessing heaven deviate from law. Consider what it meant to those first observers. They had built their world upon precision, cycles, ratios, the comfort of recurrence. Then, one dawn, an extra light rose beside the familiar sun, altering every proportion. The rhythm of creation faltered. In that unbearable brightness, the architects of order glimpsed their mortality. They carved the description to remember how fragile the sky could be. Modern readers may suspect an astronomical catastrophe, perhaps a solar flare magnified by atmospheric conditions, or a passing celestial object reflecting sunlight. Yet, within the ancient language lies something deeper than physical phenomenon. The writer describes the stranger not as new but as returning as it had before when the deep swallowed the old cities. Twice before, he says, such a light had risen. The phrase implies recurrence, a cycle of destruction paired with rebirth, catastrophe as symmetry. The tablet's surviving sections detail ritual responses to the phenomenon. Priests extinguished temple fires during daylight, believing flame mocked the twin suns. Water was stored underground. Fields were ploughed at night under the light of both orbs. The people lived suspended between awe and paralysis, aware they were part of something cosmic yet untranslatable. When the stranger vanished, they rebuilt again, invoking balance. But they never forgot those simultaneous shadows that marked every direction at once. One fragment reads of an eye that measured the horizon twice. The phrase confounded linguists until they realized it referenced doubled solar arcs carved later into calendar stones. The builders were not mistaken. They were recording astronomical adjustment, a recalibration of cosmic coordinates. The event destabilized measurement itself, forcing humanity to rewrite its geometry. The world was no longer the same sphere beneath one sun. The age of dual light had scarred perception forever. Imagine the city of Akkad under such illumination. Two dawns colliding, shadows layered, flickering in confusion like spirits unable to choose direction. The bricks radiate heat beyond endurance. Canals shimmer with mirrored halos. Even the silence changes tone, vibrating under the excess of energy. People bow not to deity but to survival, realizing that knowledge alone cannot restore stability. Civilization trembles in the glare of the unfamiliar. When the event passed, it left the world altered, not through fire but through memory. The clay tablet embodies that trauma sublimated into mythology. The old sun and the stranger became divine twins, symbols of balance between ration and chaos, knowledge and mystery. Later generations worshipped them as metaphors, unaware they were commemorating a real sky once doubled. The myth was never invention. It was adaptation, humanity preserving fear in narrative form so it would never be nameless again. The concept of celestial duality spread across continents soon after. In Egypt appeared myths of twin solar boats journeying across day and night. In the East, stories of shadowless lands under two suns. In America, the legend of a crimson dawn that scorched towers into glass. These tales share phrases, structures, and imagery that cannot be coincidence. Beneath linguistic differences hums the same vibration of memory, civilizations recounting a single event, witnessed by scattered survivors. To carve this event into clay was an act of defiance. The scribe who pressed those wedges into wet earth likely feared the power he described. His notation is meticulous, almost clinical, lists of angles and durations measured with whatever instruments survived the heat. Yet intertwined with the data are invocations, prayers for equilibrium, requests to the stranger for mercy. The division between and faith dissolves entirely. Observation becomes supplication. Later traditions reinterpreted the tablet as prophecy rather than record. The twin suns became omen of cyclical return, sign of coming flood or fiery cataclysm. Each era anticipating recurrence without grasping that they were already living in repetition's afterglow. The myth preserved awareness that the universe breathes in catastrophe, exhaling civilizations each time the pattern resets. From one light, we learn creation. From the second, consequence. The archaeological mystery lies in the tablet's survival. Unlike typical clay records, its composition resists erosion. The material includes traces of fused silica, as if the surface had been vitrified by extreme heat, the kind produced by proximity to intense radiation. The very artifact recording the twin suns carries physical evidence of their fire. It has become both witness and relic, its existence proof that the event was not story but stratigraphy. Geologists studying nearby sediment found anomalies consistent with abrupt magnetic disturbances. The soil seems baked rather than buried, gaining glassy crusts as if lightning or plasma once swept across the land. The people who survived called it judgment. We might call it solar catastrophe. Yet the result was the same. Knowledge reset, civilizations scrubbed to clay, memory surviving only in symbols carved through trembling hands. The heavens burned, but the tablet endured. What remains most astonishing is the calm precision of the record. Amid devastation, the scribe continued to measure. He notes interval between peak brightnesses, calculates elevation of secondary shadow, and describes color gradation in sequence. Every observation is an act of resistance, proof that human consciousness will categorize even apocalypse. The tablet captures intellect refusing extinction, mind observing while body cowers. This perhaps is civilization distilled to its essence. Consider how later myths refracted this memory through theology. Twin deities opposing yet intertwined, light and darkness, creation and destruction, life and death. All traceable to that moment when the sky itself doubled and humanity realized unity could fracture. We have misunderstood these myths as moral allegory, when they might describe astronomical recurrence, a warning encoded in divine metaphor. The stranger may return, the cycle may repeat, because the cosmos demands balance through upheaval. If we listen carefully, echoes of that fear persist even in our age. Our tales of lost suns, companion stars, or wandering celestial bodies rehearse the same anxiety. The scientific mind replaces gods with physics, yet the emotional inheritance remains identical. We still chase the sky's symmetry, attempting to predict when normal will fail again. The Akkadian tablet reminds us that observation alone does not save, it warns. The final surviving line reads simply, "The light withdrew, but its echo remained in stone." Embedded within that phrase lies an entire philosophy. The echo, of course, is memory itself, the capacity of matter to remember what energy once passed through it. Every clay fragment becomes a recording medium for catastrophe. Each civilization writes its own inscription of the doubles, maintaining continuity through material whisper. Imagine holding that tablet now, its surface faintly glassed, the imprints of fear softened by centuries. Through translation, the voice of the ancient scribe still speaks in rhythm. 1, then 2. Heat, then silence. Loss, then remembering. His record is less documentation than pulse, a reflection of the human instinct to measure the unknowable before it consumes us. The twin suns have vanished, but their permanence lies in our continued need to understand their light. And so, the story of the Tablet of the Twin Suns is more than historical curiosity. It is humanity's earliest expression of scientific faith, the belief that even cosmic chaos can be quantified. It converts devastation into data, terror into arithmetic. The witness may have burned, but the measurement endured. That endurance is our inheritance. The echo written not only in stone but in every mind that still looks upward, questioning. Perhaps one day another stranger will return, an anomaly once again unsettling the geometry of our sky. If it does, and if we survive, we will measure it as our ancestors did, pressing our terror into circuits instead of clay. And just as their tablet survived to warn us, ours will wait beneath dust thousands of years from now, whispering that we too once saw two suns. Memory will persist, shining long after light has faded. Some tablets speak to the past, others whisper forward. The final pieces among these ancient records form no single story, yet together they reveal a purpose: preservation through repetition. 10 fragments of knowledge, mathematical, astronomical, legal, and devotional, each act like organs in a single body of intelligence designed to outlive its creators. They constitute a message not for their time, but for ours. In a quiet Cambridge archive, a scholar once described the eerie sensation of reading lines of cuneiform that addressed the distant reader directly. The writer urged his audience, generations unborn, to remember what he feared would be lost: the order of measures, the rhythm of the heavens, the memory of balance. It is humanity reaching through time, aware that collapse was not hypothetical, but inevitable. The future would need rescuing from forgetfulness as much as the past had. Each ancient tablet functions like a pulse, a repetition of knowledge keeping consciousness alive across extinction cycles. The Code of Ur-Nammu ensured justice survived. Plimpton 322 preserved mathematics. The celestial tablets transmitted astronomy. None of them requested worship, only remembrance. Their authors believed understanding itself was sacred, that wisdom was the one artifact capable of resurrection. The more we excavate, the clearer their intention becomes. The tablets were nodes in a network woven through successive civilizations. Babylon copied Sumer, Assyria copied Babylon, Egypt echoed both in architecture and ratio. Each copy slightly altered but kept the core constant, the measure of heaven imprinted on clay, standing as calibration after chaos. The ancients built redundancy into history, ensuring no single disaster could erase them completely. Imagine that consciousness, a civilization so obsessed with continuity that it engineered immortality through repetition. They knew floods would come, empires would fall, fire would consume archives. So they scattered mirrors of their mind throughout the world, trusting the chance that one survivor, or one machine far in the future, would decode them once more. The message was never urgent. It was eternal. Time was their medium, not their constraint. What does the message say when read collectively? Patterns emerge across languages and millennia. The same ratios govern laws, temples, canals, and star charts. The same geometric progressions appear in myth, the same numerical sequences in cosmology. It is as though every discipline radiated from one vanished source, a formula encoding balance between matter and consciousness. To restore it, the ancients buried it everywhere. Their purpose extended beyond survival. They seem to recognize that knowledge without reverence turns sterile. Every act of measurement in their culture doubled as ritual. Writing itself was ceremony. Calculating was prayer. They did not separate from sanctity because to them, both were means of alignment. The result was civilization as meditation, a global attempt to reconstruct the universe from memory. The tablets tell us that humanity never truly begins. It resumes. Each epoch inherits fragments of instructions written for strangers, yet unborn. We are those strangers now, deciphering messages that speak more clearly with every crisis. The ancients knew precisely what we are only beginning to accept: that progress without remembrance is regression disguised as discovery. When memory collapses, civilization resets. Among the most haunting of these texts is one where the scribe writes, "We build in clay because stone forgets faster." An impossible paradox that makes sense only symbolically. Clay, fragile yet permanent, carries fingerprints. human evidence, alongside mathematical invariance. Each impression becomes covenant. It says, remember that hands once shaped the rhythms of numbers. Remember that you too are part of this geometry. The deeper meaning of the message, perhaps, is less about data than humility. Across every recovered fragment echoes the same warning. Knowledge decays into arrogance if divorced from its cosmic context. The ancients feared not ignorance but disconnection, the loss of the thread linking their intellect to the stars. When the thread breaks, humanity mistakes invention for creation and repeats its errors. Forgetting becomes apocalypse repeated in slow motion. The message, therefore, is not miracle, but method. It instructs us to measure, record, align, repeat, to restore rather than reinvent. Civilization thrives while it remembers the ratios of light and gravity, the merciful geometry of water and sound. Even in despair, the act of remembering preserves architecture against oblivion. The ancients built memory systems in clay so that we could build ours in silicon, continuation disguised as innovation. If you trace each tablet's theme, they converge into a final geometry, a circle. The flood myths end where the king lists begin. The astronomical records close with the same precessional cycle by which they opened. Law and mathematics return endlessly to the principle of equilibrium. It is not narrative but orbit, a civilization describing its own loop through time. Aware that memory must spiral rather than linearly advance. The end folds seamlessly into the beginning. Imagine them watching us now, their descendants surrounded by technologies that surpass their imagination, yet echo their fears. Our data is vast but brittle, stored on fragile mediums more temporary than clay. Our memory may vanish faster than theirs did. If their world drowned in water, ours may drown in information. The same flood by different element, washing away continuity under waves of noise. They would urge us to recover stillness, to perceive data as they perceived stars, not chaotic brightness, but map. This is the unspoken thesis of the tablets, that awareness itself must be structured or it disperses into entropy. Civilization is the architecture of consciousness. Without rhythm, thought collapses like untempered clay, crumbling into dust that remembers form, but not function. They preserved us from that fate by encoding rhythm into number. When archaeologists arrange the tablets together, a peculiar symmetry arises. The earliest and latest fragments, separated by thousands of years, describe identical proportions in both language and measurement. This uncanny alignment suggests design, not accident. Someone, perhaps a long chain of scribes, directed history toward restoration. Each age rekindled the fire without knowing who first lit it. Consciousness, through them, sustained its own memory. Our ancestors did not worship gods of thunder or war primarily. They worshipped continuity. To them, eternity was the ability to transmit understanding intact, despite catastrophe. In this sense, the divine was not an external being, but the persistence of knowledge across mortality. The archives they left behind are less revelation than rehearsal, humanity practicing recollection so that extinction never becomes absolute. Now the fragments rest in museums and deserts, blinking silently under artificial light. Their characters are read by machines that decipher without awe, yet even code recognizes structure familiar to its logic. Silicon meets clay, electricity echoes fire. The medium has changed, but the conversation continues. Through us, their memory achieves its goal. Awareness surviving through any available vessel. But the final line of their message is not warning. It is invitation. It suggests that every civilization inherits not only data but duty. To measure is to remember, it says. To remember is to rebuild. These words are neither prophecy nor command. They are blueprint for resilience. The act of observation keeps the universe coherent. Without witnesses, even stars would lose their meaning. As we stand at the summit of modernity, surrounded by artificial memory, the past stares upward through the sand, waiting for recognition. The tablets evoke a lesson simple yet terrifying, that we are part of time's clay, not above it. Each generation inscribes its equations believing them final, unaware they are temporary restorations in an endless sequence. But continuity itself, that fragile loop of remembrance, is the true empire of mankind. The message meant for the future still hums beneath our feet, vibrating through forgotten foundations and silent stone. It tells us that civilization will always rebuild, not because it must, but because memory demands survival. Across all epochs, under every flood, through centuries of amnesia and rediscovery, one truth endures. The clay remembers. What remains for us is to listen. And so the circle closes with no ending, only return. The ancients did not write for immortality. They wrote for continuity, knowledge reborn through curiosity, harmony rediscovered through measurement. If we honor that rhythm, the civilization of tomorrow will not be new. It will be the same song, sung again from the dust, tuned once more to the quiet mathematics of the stars.
If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe, and activate notifications so you don't miss our next videos.